Good afternoon. We're starting our second session, which also will be devoted to the OECD recommendations and review. But here, the subject matter will be rather practical, about practical implementation of all these recommendations. And I do hope that we will really hear about all these barriers and opportunities that we'll find along the way of implementation. We have here a very interesting team. They are representatives of the public authorities of Ukraine who are supposed to actually implement all these recommendations. Maxim Nefedov, First Deputy Minister of Economy and Trade of Ukraine. Sergei Shklyar, unfortunately he couldn't make it today, but we have representative of the Ministry of Justice. We have our partners, Deputy Business Ombudsman Yaroslav Grigorchak and Evgenia Smachko, World Bank Group representative. We have joint projects with them also aimed at implementation of SD recommendations. We have also esteemed representatives of from other states, from relevant agencies, the head of Latvian Competition Support Agency. We would be very interested to hear from you about the challenge that you face along your path. Also, we have the Chief of the Office of Slovak Republic, and we are very thankful to the Slovak Republic because indeed thanks to your contribution we've had the opportunity to implement this OECD review and have these results that we are looking at. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Maxim Nefedov. He'll speak about the vision of further cooperation with our agency with the final goal to develop and support the competition. Thank you. Good afternoon. The Ministry of Economy probably is one of the major partners of AMC in the area of competition development, and of course in every area which we are in charge of, we are trying to modernize, to reform the situation, to ensure equal conditions for all players, to ensure transparent rules of the game, and we are absolutely confident, not just theoretically, but also through practical measures undertaken by the current government. We can see that only where we can ensure proper level of competition, we have chances to improve the overall situation. Indeed, in some areas like governmental support, this support may be necessary. Many countries of the world use it, in fact, but the general policy consists in making the level playing field for everybody, and that's our major goal. This is what we concentrate our efforts at. I can give you just an example, like public acquisitions, where the only way to achieve the efficient and effective transparent rule, the only way is to grant open and free access to all potential bidders, thus through competition, ensuring the victory of the best proposals, including the right of those who are not satisfied to challenge the decision. Our practical work with IMC is within several areas. Of course, first of all, it's about the National Program of Competition Development. It's a strategic document which still does not exist in Ukraine. Actually, the reviews of 2008 and 2016 drew attention to this. Now it's part of the plan within the plan of the work of the Cabinet of Ministers. So we will have this document, and then we'll work together on practical oriented document. Of course, we work on changes with the framework CDP program. Now it's stage 2 that started, and we are the co-beneficiaries. The program is designed until the mid of 2018. Also this year in August, will have quite significant changes, I would say, but that's a big layer of changes concerning attitude of the government towards the assessment of influences over certain markets, including assessment of governmental support. And I believe a number of public authorities still underestimate the impact that it will have over the performance, over transparency of the regulatory field, over the tools that they can use to achieve their goals. All that may seem very theoretical effort, but in fact, that entails a number of practical outcomes. I think one of the major problems of Ukrainian public administration is that instead of taking a spoon and eating a soup, we take a fork, then we say it's not good to eat soup. Let's change the fork, let's maybe cover these holes, with something, and then we'll eat soup still with this fork. Well, it's not efficient. We just waste a lot of time. Too many things are overregulated, which is not to the business convenience, and the heavier is this structure, the poorer is its influence, thus allowing to public official to take the merit for any positive results, while the negative results are left without any authors, as if they had happened just automatically. And plus, the more sophisticated structure you use, the easier it is to abuse, and the more corruption risks you'll have. So we have a lot to do to implement this work, to develop respective secondary legislation, to develop methodologies to measure the level of governmental support. As a former representative of business, I am confident that if you cannot measure something, it just does not exist. So we certainly need to make it all measurable, including the results of governmental supports. We often hear that, hey, we need to save lives of farmers or IT, maybe astronauts or public officials. We always need to save somebody, but what are the real results of this the rescue operation? It's often a question mark. So for me personally, it's very interesting, and I'm ready to pay a good deal of my time and attention so that we finish this year with well operational system in this area. Also, I'd like to say that this does not mean that the government intends to just remove itself from the relevant functions. That does not mean that the government has no intention to defend its part of the business in specific areas, and even if we look at some countries where the governmental support is quite significant, so the state still has to do that, but we need to do that very efficiently instead of just diluting this assistance among too many units or businesses, thus making more concrete results. And one more mechanism of cooperation with the AMC. This is what I deal with most frequently. This is the specific efforts of AMCU as the complaint authority. And here I think we've achieved significant progress during the last year and a half. I think that can be estimated in a quantitative measure just by number of the complaints that have been processed, and Yaroslav will tell us about that. Of course, there always will be complaints. You cannot have zero complaints because actually in any tender only one party is satisfied. But all other parties may start saying that, yes, I do that in advance, that's all corruption, etc. But we can see improvement of performance, our performance in this area. We understand that the competition development certainly entails bigger workload over the MC too. So we need to make sure that that does not really have negative impact over the work. So we need certainly to work on the improvement of legislation in this area in a collective manner, and by implementing some changes based on our practical experience, or even by changing something if we see that something does not work properly. I mean here also the funding of the AMC to make sure that this authority is absolutely independent, because the underfinanced authority certainly is not autonomous enough to take care of the competition. So, with this regard, we've really made a good progress. That does not mean that we are stopping, that we don't want to move. We're certainly aware of all the existing problems. I know my colleagues sometimes keep on sitting and reviewing complaints till 2 in the morning. But at least we know the methods how we can overcome that. So I want to thank AMC for the active cooperation and express my hope that the next review will be even more optimistic by its results. Thank you.
Thank you. We missed the first session, during which a lot was said about financial independence of such authority. At that time, we attended another meeting where similar issue was discussed. So let me ask you how financial independent this authority can be, and what steps will lead to that. Well, this issue of funding is quite painful, and on the one hand, we would all like to see independent public authorities. On the other hand, government is not business. You can, and you're supposed to sell it. I am personally responsible for administrative services in the ministry, and I know that this may give rise to, well, this non-conviction certificate issued by the Ministry of Interior. I don't think that there are people in Ukraine who would do that just for fun. This certificate is something that you can only apply for when you need it, and if public authorities start looking at this as an opportunity to make money. I'm just talking about regulation, administrative. This can take us a long way. On the other hand, we did procurement reform, so if you have to rely on one figure in the budget, and then we know how stable our budget legislation is, there's sequestration, it is easy to imagine how you can cut the wings, so to speak, or influence the functionality of the ministry. You can appeal to austerity, to pension fund competition. You can actually argue that a good competition development is a luxury that only well-developed countries can afford. So we have to stay within the legal framework. We are part of a much bigger puzzle, and we cannot satisfy ourselves with saying that we are fine. The Ministry of Finance, if you ask me, seems to be quite willing to discuss ways to improve the funding of Anti-Monopoly Committee. Us, we also think of how this can be compensated by rearranging or transferring the complaints powers to the committee. I mean, we can probably identify sources that would not make it necessary to reduce, say, pension benefits. But this is something that has to be accomplished sooner or later. We have to find a way to make funding of the AMC stable so that they are not dependent on the exchange rate fluctuations, etc. And at the government committee meeting, someone said, and I agree, that it shouldn't provide false incentives with regard to these revenue streams. But I'm sure that we have to finalize our negotiations with the Ministry of Finance in order to secure stable funding of the AMC. Well, public servants are in the habit of complaining about their salaries. But here we're talking about functional responsibilities that, unless properly attended to, the entire business environment suffers. That's the functions that should be performed. If the Anti-Monopoly Committee can't look into procurement-related complaints, the conditions for the business will worsen. I could recall, for instance, our argument regarding the public registries managed by the Ministry of Justice and how it's funded. We all know that if those registries doesn't function well, it certainly negatively affects the business environment. That's not about a staircase made of marble or something like that. There are some basic things that, unless they are in place, the businesses can't prosper. Thank you. With this, I would like to invite Evgenios Macescu. Maxim has already referred to a joint project with the World Bank regarding competition promotion program as one of the key instruments of advocating for better competition. Дякую, Марина. Цього ранку багато сказано.
So I don't have to speak about the so-called market failures, about the recommendations. What Maxim was saying about the activities between the Ministry of Economy and the AMCU is also reflecting our activities together with the Ministry of Economy, since we do not see competition as a standing alone product. We do not see competition work, we do not see as a piecemeal approach. It has to be integrated into a holistic approach. And what the World Bank Group does in Ukraine is not only about competition, but we're linking it to the competitiveness work. You can't be competitive in this country or any other country without having a level playing field, without having clear rules. And exactly what Fred was saying in the morning, when linking all of these different areas, businesses do need regulations, not necessarily a lot of them, but now we are more and more often saying about the smart regulations. They have to be low cost and low risk for businesses and for the public sector. So competition work of ours is leading towards this kind of low risk, low cost regulations for the businesses having a level playing field. This is an entry point for us, and we're glad that engaging in these activities together with the MCU, we kind of closed the circle. We're looking at value chains, we're looking at competitive value chains, we're looking at industry-specific work, agriculture, energy sector, any other transport, river transport, Black Sea transport. But we're looking also from the perspectives of competition. All the companies have to have the same rules. Certainly, even if looking at the theme of the second sessions, which are the challenges, which are the opportunities, we would see some of the challenges going ahead based on some of the research that has been done by the Ministry of Economy, the state-owned enterprises. We're talking about the same level playing field, and we're talking about all kind of ownership of the enterprises. If looking at some of the figures based off the Ministry of Economy data, is that around 3,500 enterprises owned by the state, which are around 20% of the GDP, and only half of them being operational, and the 46 largest SOEs accounting for 94% of assets and 92% of all losses in 2015. So there is a lot of work ahead of us. But again, as some of the speakers in the morning were saying, I'm also personally positive, and I'm always looking in a positive way. I'm always see the half full glass and not half empty glass. And the initiative which has been launched by the MCU approaching us, the World Bank Group, and I would say fruitfully pushing for more results, for targeted results, at the end of the day will cascade into two major outcomes of our work, of a very small project that we have at the moment. By the end of June 2017, I mean June, which is the end of the calendar, or of the fiscal year within the World Bank Group, is the as I was saying, two pieces. Certainly this is the policy work, but we have started while identifying all the pillars that we need to work, that we'll be looking into the market research together with OECD, since this is a tool that has been developed together with OECD, and we are ongoing now to see all the 12 sectors based on 6 industries. I mean, there's a questionnaire which exists, and now the work is ongoing in answering all the questions in the most nitty-gritty details manner, so that we have a clear picture what happens in those industries in Ukraine. And then, inter alia, based on this research, we will be looking also into the policy work that, as Yuri was mentioning this morning, that we're planning, and also answering the concrete question from Stephanie. We aim to have by end of June the draft ready for peer review, for stakeholders analysis, for public consultations, so that we incorporate into that draft all the feedback that we will be receiving from the private sector, from the public sector, from the IFIs, from the bilateral donors, from multilateral donors like EU, OECD, or bilateral as, for example, USAID and others. So this is what we're looking at ahead, yet. Certainly we will not stop in June. And I was just chatting during the break with Yuri, is that we've already started the fundraising for future activities, and we have applied for more funds. In this case, it will be based on a bilateral agreement with some of the potential donor countries, so that after we are done with the policy work, we have to recognize that it's a paperwork. We have to go with enforcement. And what is planned, what we have planned ahead of us, is this is the enforcement. This is certainly the state aid which enters into effect in August 2017. This is gap assessment, and this is the capacity building. Exactly what we have seen already in some of the presentations during the session this morning. So again, rolling over all of these activities, we plan to have some funds available for us, for the MCU, of course, by June 2019, so that we can cover most of the activities that we plan, that we have in our concept notes, that are recommended by other partners, certainly by the OECD primarily. Thanks. Any questions, certainly I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much.
На ваші запитання. Thanks a lot. I've got a question to ask. I understand that you did similar projects in other jurisdictions. How successful have they been? Ну що ж, справді були реалізовані аналогічні проекти.
Our core team, which sits in Washington, D.C. in our headquarters, we have limited resources in the regions, but those ladies are flying in, flying out all the time. A lot of the work has been done, certainly primarily in developing countries, Latin America, Western Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia. The results are there, and the path that has been taken on board is more or less the same, well, certainly tailor-made, that we're having in Ukraine. So it's not inventing or reinventing the bicycle, but adjusting it to the needs, to the institutional framework, to the legal framework. I have my colleagues from my own country, from Moldova. I'm right here, right next to Ukraine. We have done such kind of work back in 2011, 2012, together with the Competition Council. Progress is there. We've done such kind of work in Latin America, primarily because the new governments of those countries are always requesting the assistance. And I just got into my mind one of the examples that some of you know, Marta Licetti, that we've met. Yuri met her in one of the forums. She was giving the taco example in Mexico, and she was showing how much of the industries, like transportation, would cost you, the tacos per se, and how much we're overpaying for a simple taco. So that's a great example when cartels have been identified, when concerted practices have been identified. Certainly we do have to recognize that there are exemptions, there are rules and rules, but there are exemptions. And one of the famous EU example on manufacturing the laundry machines, the laundry equipment, so that all the companies have agreed, with the later permission from the European Commission, that they will not have at a lower than exact price machines, these kind of laundry machines. Why? They have done an impact assessment, exactly what we were talking in the morning, that we have to do also competition assessment, is that this is protecting the environment, this is less wastewater, this is less powder to be used. So everything has to be viewed in a very, very large, from very large point of view. So we don't have just to limit ourselves mechanically, technically to extinguishing fires. We have to look into a clear picture, big picture, and not only look at the short-term results, but medium and long-term results.
Thank you. Я хочу
також результатів, а не лише короткострокових. Let me also ask the representative of the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine. Given that enforcement is one of the important functions of the AMCU, let me take you to some of the recommendations where criticism is voiced with regard to the enforcement of the AMCU decisions. We all are aware of the fact that if enforcement is weak or compromised, then prevention won't be effective. So your ministry how do you think you could better work with the AMCU in order to improve enforcement? Well, and other issues. Hello, I am Konstantin Silkin, Deputy Director of the State Service of Executions of the Ministry of Justice. At short notice, I had to fill in for my colleague who is a leading expert, and he would have probably given you better understanding. However, I'll try my best to give you to tell you how we are planning to work close with the AMC. The ministry and my service, as you may well recognize, help AMCU execute decisions on fines and other sanctions imposed on businesses. Though decisions of the AMCU are binding, very few of its decisions are voluntarily complied with by the businesses. Less than 1%, if I'm not mistaken. All others are appealed in courts, and only after a decision is made by a court, we put it to execution. According to our stats, the number of decisions and execution proceedings that we open has been increasing. In the past 2016, we had to enforce 180 decisions to the tune of 260 billion hryvnias. You may also recall that execution of court decisions leaves much to be desired, to put it mildly, in the country. So both decisions of the AMCU and the court decisions passed to support that enforcement are no better than other court decisions made in the country. Why so? Could point to a number of reasons. It's about the qualification, salaries of those who are in charge of execution. There are other reasons to be taken into consideration, such as the general economic situation. If you look at the 2016 stats, you would see that we, our service, managed to complete about half of the proceedings we had open. This, however, doesn't mean that we manage to collect. Some of the proceedings were brought to an end because the debtor didn't seem to have funds that could be collected. So 46% of all proceedings are ended in view of this particular reason. No assets to collect, no property to collect. Otherwise, we try to do what is open to us. We search for assets. We use all relevant databases in order to identify, but in the majority of cases, the response is that no property found. So that's objective, so to speak, aspect, and there are some subjective ones regarding the collection. In many cases, proceedings are delayed, so to speak, through appeal and appellate procedure may take a year, 2, and sometimes as long as 3. It's a whole lot of time, during which some of the insolvent businesses can resort to various measures in order to evade payment of the fines. We think that it's in many cases done on purpose in order to prevent that from happening. The Ministry of Justice, jointly with the Anti-Monopoly Committee, is drawing up a law amending the relevant legislation, according to which AMCU decisions will not only be binding but be deemed as the writ of execution. In other words, the AMCU will send its decisions to our service, thus reducing the opportunities of appeal and expediting collection of the fines or other sanctions imposed. Well, we're still working on the draft law, and let me take this opportunity to invite the stakeholders to contribute in order to come up with the best possible wording, so to speak. Generally, the Ministry of Justice supports this initiative because we know only too well that other agencies can issue writs of this kind that are self-implementing. Pension Fund, Ministry of Infrastructure, and a number of others. So there is law and practice in place, and Anti-Monopoly Committee decisions can become part of this practice. So once again, let me say that the Ministry of Justice will provide all-round support to this initiative.
Thank you. In view of the timing, we'll probably offer the floor to other participants. Then we'll have time for the question. I also want to invite the head of the Council for Competition to the floor. We've had very long friendly relations, and we are open for your advices because we know you have your experience of implementation of OECD recommendations. What were your challenges? What should we pay more attention to? No? Не чуємо.
Very much for inviting us to this exciting panel and to Ukraine. I'm always very happy to come here and to visit our friends. I think our authorities both are really very close now in relations regarding exchange of experience, and we can regard each other as friends. I was asked to make a helicopter view from Latvia competition enforcement in the light of recommendations made by OECD. And at the beginning, I would like to take opportunity to congratulate you on this possibility to benefit from OECD recommendations, because we know very well that such reviews are really very useful tool for many countries in evaluation of competition policy, competition enforcement, and in formulating further steps. As regards the Latvian Competition Authority, our competition enforcement and practice, law enforcement practice was examined by OECD in 2014. And now we are a proud member of the OECD and take active part in competition committee. I have to say that we in Latvia for many years now have observed the development of the competition policy in Ukraine. And we have noticed many significant accomplishments done in Ukraine so far, and many of them have been mentioned in this report too. One of them, I would like to say, is cooperation issues. So, personally, how I feel it. And in terms of cooperation, I have to say that it's very important to cooperate with national agencies. And our experience shows that really we can benefit from each other's experience. We have met many times with Ukrainian colleagues discussing matters of cartel enforcement, because I have to say that in Latvia, leniency doesn't work so well too, regardless of having this provision leniency program since 2004. But I have to say it's not always important to trust only on leniency, because the authority, which do not have such great possibility to receive leniency application, can develop itself much stronger, to be more active. And for example, in Latvia, we receive a lot of information about bid rigging cartels from public procurement organizers, since we have invested in education of public procurement organizers how to recognize signs of prohibited agreements. I also can assert that we have noticed that our Ukrainian colleagues under the new leadership, but I don't know if it's correctly said new leadership, because Yuri is still many years at the office, probably is, that colleagues are very enthusiastic, willing to align the Ukrainian competition law and best practice with the internationally recognized standards and best practices. And we feel very strong commitment among the staff to raise the quality of the authorities' performance, to set new standards, despite having really many obstacles, such as very poor compensation and lack of resources, etc. I would like to consider a little bit detailed 4 very important issues mentioned already in recommendations, which are indispensable for the authority to be professional, efficient, and to gain an impact in society. They are, of course, sufficient funding and autonomy. Second one is rights to prioritization strategy. Third one is adequate enforcement powers for deterrence. And fourth issue is strong competition advocacy. All these recommendations have been mentioned in the report, and they still need to be implemented or to be continued to implement. Speaking about sufficient funding and autonomy, I think they are prerequisites for professional enforcement. And we all know that the success of competition authority depends to a great extent on knowledgeable, motivated staff, because the competition cases become more and more complex. It's not possible to compare what kind of cases we had 10 or 15 years ago, and it means that the staff needs really very sophisticated legal and economic expertise, not only economic expertise. I am an economist, but I have to say both legal and economic expertise is very important. However, when I took a glance over the table in the report called the average cost of state employees institutions in Ukraine, I was really surprised, because I noticed that the authority is at the lowest position. And what we saw in some tables, the budget has significantly dropped since 2014, and the authority is facing serious constraints on hardware, software, and etc. I have to say that we in Latvia, our authority, are not high-earning authority, but we are not at the lowest position in comparison to other state public administrative bodies or law enforcement agencies. But we strongly advocate on further changes in our autonomy, funding, salaries, And we are trying to convince the government that we need sufficient financial resources, we need autonomous management and budgeting tools. Since 2017, so this year, our institution's budget is supplemented by revenues from the merger fees. It makes approximately 5% to 1 million what we have per year. We are 50, our staff consists of 50 employees. But of course, it is not enough to make the salary system competitive, to set the salaries at the same level as they are for sectoral regulators and other law enforcement agencies, and we need that the system, the approach of government should be changed. And unfortunately, it's not easy task because it ends not with the drafting amendments to the budget law, but we have to convince the government that our work is as much important as other public administrative authorities' work, and that we have to have overview over all economic sectors, including regulated sectors, where very often we have cases on abuse of dominant position, and those cases result from the mistakes made by the regulator. For example, 4 cases on abuse of dominant position we had against Latvian national postal service provider. And we see there is regulation not correctly made, there are some exceptions, and there is some faults made by sectoral regulator. Secondly, as I mentioned, it is mentioned already in recommendations, it's very important that authorities should have rights to prioritize. It means to decide in which situations they have to initiate case and which competition concerns or alleged infringements to solve with alternative means. We are doing that since 2013, and I have to say we have, of course, published, prepared, discussed with undertakings prioritization strategy, and it works very well because it allows us to concentrate on really heavy competition infringement, like bid rigging cases, cartels, very such important, which can change all the market, very strong cases. The more visible becomes the agency by informing the society, the more applications, complaints gets the agency, and it's our case. If we would not have this prioritization strategy, not possibility to decide in which situations to initiate case and which solve with other means, I don't know how we would be able with our 50 employees to solve all this amount of complaints. But now we are able to issue warnings, do mediation in warnings we issue usually in smaller bid rigging cases. Mediation we apply to smaller abuse of dominant position cases like communal services where local dominant players are abusing their power, and it works very well. Undoubtedly, it's important that the agency has its strategy made transparent with guidelines, notices, articles, and of course it should be made clear to society. Third point is any competition authority needs to have an investigative power to penalize, obligation to collect the fine. In autumn 2016, we carried out public opinion survey on competition matters, and more than 60% of respondents, among them companies, law offices, local municipalities, NGOs, claimed that the most deterrent and preventive effect on the competition landscape have decisions on infringements and imposed fines. And it's indispensable to have really such important decisions where infringements have been fined. And of course, to prove an infringement, each authority has power to conduct dawn raids, to search and seize from the private residences, to collect sufficient evidences. And I think I read in your report about so-called mandatory consent of the undertaking being under investigation. I think really significant violations will never be discovered if the requirement will continue to exist, this mandatory consent. And of course, it's also not deterrent and not permissible if the authority has no possibility to follow where are the fines. If the undertakings use the appeal time to restructure the legal entities and to evade payment of fine. Yuri mentioned that approximately 10 to 20% of fines are paid to state budget. Yeah, it's very low actually. Yes. In Latvia, about 70 to 80% of fines are paid to state budget. And it's because we have had many cases where perpetrators had transferred assets of cartelized, penalized business to the new entities. And probably our authorities, one of the few authorities in Latvia who on its own initiative for several years is turning against the companies that have transferred their assets. Since 2013, we have also introduced in our cases concept of parental liability, and the Supreme Court has supported our approach when we are really initiating market inquiry, where is the fine, where is the company? And if we establish such legal and economic succession, then we have also the right to penalize the new owner of the cartelized assets. And it's very important, really, for deterrence and prevention. And a few words about the promotion of competition culture advocacy, what is very important, I think, especially in post-Sovietic area, like Latvia, Ukraine. And OECD review highlights that competition authority in Ukraine is very extensively involved in improving of competition policy in the government. I think I can speak only about Latvia. I feel that in Latvia there is still lack of understanding of competition idea among public administrative bodies. Because public administrative bodies, especially municipalities, still tend to ignore rules of competition neutrality, issuing decisions, regulations, where they discriminate private over public entities. And therefore, advocacy, promotion of competition culture, of competition idea, I think it's very important in post-Soviet countries, where we still have such national champions supported by the government, local or national large players, and then they abuse their very often dominant position, as I told in the example, or local municipalities which think that the principle of autonomy permits them to do whatever they want, destroying such a level playing field in the competition. And I think it's very good that you in Ukraine have this possibility to issue binding recommendations, because we in Latvia, yes, we issue recommendations, but unfortunately they do not have this binding character. And therefore, we in Latvia are striving to get additional powers for competition agency to have power to enforce not only against undertakings, but also against public and administrative bodies. Because sometimes the infringements which stem from the regulation are much worse than the smaller cartels or minor abuse of dominant position. Okay, to conclude, let me wish you success in implementing OECD recommendations. I think really you are on the right track. And I wish you very good cooperation with international organizations and national authorities, of course, with Latvia too. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Насправді в нас буде наступний.
Дякую. Thank you very much indeed. We'll devote the next session to the legislative initiative and some issues just referred to, in particular the penalties, collection of penalties. We are working now on that. We'll share our ideas during the next session. And now Timur Mericha, the head of Anti-Monopoly Office, Slovak Republic, please. What would your advices be? What would be your advices to both AMC and other public authorities to develop in support of the competition.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really happy being here. Slovakia participated in the Ukraine review project in 2 ways, as a donor with commitment and also as one of the peer examiners in the committee session. And as what we targeted on, what we focused on, it was the enforcement of decisions and sanctions and the judicial review. So I would start with the enforcement, and you were here, so you know that the enforcement was already discussed at the first session and also now, so we see that it is a really important part of also the competition policy, because as it was mentioned, you can have a great decisions, but you just don't want to become a joke of them, because you really, when you have a decision, you once at the end you have to collect the money if there's a penalty, because if you don't do that, it just almost worthless, the whole effort. And what we see from the report, that in Ukraine this enforcement process, it takes a really long time and very often it's not effective, and this leads, of course, that the companies using this opportunity to avoid paying for these fines. And I think you cannot blame these companies, because if there's an opportunity to do that, they will do it. That's just natural. So it's up to you as a state to arrange such a rules that they cannot do it, or they will see it's useless to do it. And maybe I will start with my suggestions or recommendations. So first one, and the general one, is make it as fast and effective as possible. What I would suggest, I'm not sure how much is this the part of your judicial system, but we try to use the parental liability and the economic succession to avoid this kind of conduct, have to, let's say, re-establish the company, to liquidate the company, or do other things. I can say it really works. For example, the experience from Slovak Republic, that there was, and it still is a case, where the European Commission decided that the Slovak telecommunication company abused its dominant position, but in the very same decision they decided that also the parent company, the Deutsche Telekom, was guilty, and they also got the fine. So really, and trust me, for Deutsche Telekom it's almost impossible to do such a thing as to liquidate the company just to avoid a fine. So the higher level you go and the higher levels you involve to your decisions, I think it will be easier for you than afterwards to collect the fines. Then the suggestion might be, if it's possible, and if I have a good understanding, maybe it would be good to get rid of this court enforcement order, which is in your law. I actually do not understand properly what it means, but I just see this is kind of a mid-step, and I see really no use of it or no reason why it is there. I see the news and I see what is the task of your state executive service, and I think this is a good way how to collect money. If you have a effective body which can for really effectively, which can size the bank accounts, sell assets, and really collect money. Because maybe I think in the first session it was mentioned that also the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine could do it themselves, this collecting money, but I really cannot imagine how they can do it, because you need absolutely different type of people to do such a job. I think your task is to control the competition in Ukraine and not collect money. So that's why I think really specialized state agency or maybe some outsourced bar of executors might do the job. But they really have to work effectively. So, and as I said, the other thing we commented was the judicial review, because again, it is natural and it is good that there's always a right to appeal to the court after you made your decision. But again, if you don't want your decision to become a joke, you need lawyers who understand this kind of, let's say, the competition policy, as it was mentioned, because very often competition is not only about law, very often it's about economic, and the judges are lawyers, and that's natural. So maybe again the suggestions, because frankly I have to say we have the very same problem in Slovak Republic, and we are dealing with this for almost 20 years. We are still not at the end of this process. So right now I'm going to make some suggestions to you, but I think those are the same suggestions we are trying to implement in Slovak Republic. First of all, you always have to remember there is a separation of powers, so you cannot influence the court, the judges directly. I think the only way how you can do better is a cooperation with judges and training by governmental or non-governmental bodies. I think you can also use many programs for judges where they can educate. And also, and I think this already started here in Ukraine, that if it's possible, create specialized panels of judges within courts. Of course, the question is if you have enough cases for them. Because if you have enough cases, I think this is the best way you can do it, have a specialized panels, and it doesn't mean that these specialized judges will always uphold your decision, but at least if they cancel it, you will have a clear and reasonable opinion from the court, which afterwards you can follow in your procedure. So I think this is important. And maybe my last comment, and this is not about effortness and judicial review, but maybe I just would like to follow what was said here, and because you also talked about budget, and by means that sufficient and good budget, it means that you have an independent authority which can act. I don't know what are the numbers here in Ukraine, but what helps in Slovak Republic is that every year we collect more money from penalties than we get from the state as our budget. So actually, just from really a business point of view, if there's such a thing like that in state, we are a profitable company, we can say. So maybe never use this as a main reason, but I think not you as a committee, but maybe as a representative of the government or ministries, that if you have a good running competition authority in your country, you can make money on it. Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо. І в нас також є представник замбізнес-омбудсмена, і ми мали насправді не той ж самий, але ж такі схожі.
To have a deputy business ombudsman here, Yaroslav However, please remember that we don't have as much time. Thank you. Okay, 10 minutes and 2 minutes for any questions. As an assistant business ombudsman, let me tell you that I represent the institution established in May last year on the initiative of at least 5 large business associations. We are an out-of-court settlement mechanism that has about its reputation, good name to use in order to consider cases, whereas the institutional authorities function regularly. As of today, we received over 1,000 complaints, most of them pointed to either fiscal authorities or law enforcement authorities. AMCU gave rise to very few complaints, to be frank. Last quarter we received only 1 complaint. In Q3 2016 we received 2 complaints on AMCU. I am not complimentary, believe me. The typology of the complaints we deal with comes under 3 heads: domestic legislation and clash of laws. There are some provisions in the banking legislation that contradict provisions in other laws. So this is one of the types. Another type of complaints stems from effective or ineffective operation of sectoral regulations and sectoral legislation. I'm talking about tariffs and other matters within the ambit of the national regulator for utilities and electricity. The third type is a mix of the first 2, so to speak. I am referring to the effective operation of territorial divisions of various public authorities and sectoral various sectoral regulators. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the number of individual complaints against AMCU wasn't by any means numerous, we are performing our other functions, that is to say, developing reports and so to speak, recommendations. We produced our own report. It was published in November 2016. It was entitled Challenges and Problems of Competition Oversight. It's a pity we didn't have a lot of cooperation with OECD. We hadn't made that decision before, and when whereas they completed their field work in Ukraine by the time we came up with our decision. Now, I'll show you a comparison between our product and theirs. After all, they are represented in our supervisory board, and therefore we believe, at least we are in consensus with AMCU, that we could both work towards implementation of those systemic recommendations. So, on the community of opinion, first of all, we think we should work more on AMCU's capacity building. Another aspect where we come together is the funding available to AMCU. We understand that a lot depends on that. Even the openness of AMCU depends on the money to be invested in developing this public registry. There may exist enough political will, but if there is no cash, you can't do that. Or state aid. It's exactly the case of those challenging opportunities or opportune challenges. So if I were to compare their review and ours, I may submit that us maintaining arm's length with businesses and government, I should say that our product must be more geared towards some legal measures. We are, on the other hand, we are not as competent at OECD as policy choices are concerned. Well, in the light of the feedback we had received from businesses during its preparation, that may not always correlate with the OECD's peer review. I will probably mention the proposed extension of the period of investigation into the alleged abuse of dominating position, or the amounts of fines, the calculation. At least we believe that courts and the AMCU should have the same point of departure when assessing the fines to be imposed. Of course, we can speak of methodology as so. Is that good enough for courts to have only AMCU decisions that they would proceed from making their decisions, and the quality of the court proceedings that depend so much on the qualifications of the judges. So I would encourage you to approach me or to visit our website, where you can find both Ukrainian and English translation of our report. And in conclusion, I would like to express my hope that we could work productively with the OECD and the Anti-Monopoly Committee in the future. Are there any questions? head of the MCU's Public Council, Alexander Zavadar is my name. Maxim, to my knowledge, though I didn't witness that myself, you refused to employ ProZorro system in administrative service provision, because selling forks is one thing, as to use your analogy, and another thing is reliability, security of transactions. In financial world, it's a lot depends on the ability to keep one's promises. In EU, you have a two-tiered system, and the first stage is where the quality of service is assessed, and it's given on average 85% of the weight, and only 15% goes to the price offered. So let me ask you if you're going to revisit that decision. In principle, it might seem, if this perseveres, that the government contributes to the continuation of unfair competition in certain areas. Thank you, sir. This is one of the favorite questions. I am happy to remind that thanks to this system, many people learned of the very existing of public procurement. I indeed answer questions like that on a regular basis. So, Ukraine's e-procurement system, which is fully harmonized with the EU law, doesn't make a price the only criterion. We also use this two-phase approach. Service procurement is only 1% of what the government procures, so it's not even in the top 20 of the priorities. Well, oftentimes quality comes to the forefront when the issue of gasoline purchases is in stake. So services, or rather sophisticated products, well, even in EU you can resort to the dialogue, and we're talking after all about large projects such as nuclear power plants. So in competitive dialogue, you had fewer than 100 cases for the entire EU. The entire system of public procurement is different from here you have money and I know everything. It's a different system. When you want to buy a vehicle, you would go to the dealer and look around and think whether you can afford a Mercedes or Tesla. Well, Tesla is so good, so it's a totally different system. First of all, you have to identify what you want to get, then you develop certain qualification requirements, and then the public authorities try to find a balance between, well, the best value for money. Speaking of services, legal services in particular, you have to define appropriate legal requirements. We have a success story with Naftahaz, or one of the criteria there was companies' reference in international rating list in the past 3 years. So this helps prevent entry of unqualified supplier. If you are concerned with the possible failure to deliver, then you have to pen your contract very attentively and carefully. Clearly, it's much easier to say, give me some cash and I retain the best possible lawyer. But in Ukraine, that the best possible lawyer is often your relative or next of kin. This is not a transparent method. And financial services, you mentioned them too. They are excluded from the public procurement legislation, so they're exempt from bidding. Like, once again, no problem with doing procurement of anything ranging from forks to IT solution. If there are any issues, we provide training, online training included on Prometheus or Prozor. So call us and we'll give you that training. Well, again, if you act carelessly, drafting your tender requirements, the Prozor system can always be blamed. We've already gotten used to it. It's strange to hear AMC asking questions of the Ministry of Justice and vice versa. I would I'd hope that questions should be asked by businesses or civil society. So let me start by saying that we indeed appreciate this report, which seems to be much better than the report prepared by MCU. Anyway, it appears that the competitive policies are reduced to enforcement, sanction. That's important, no problem. But where is the second dimension? Competition promotion, demonopolization, de-shadowization as the deregulation, or the so-called liquidation of offshores. Does it not promote competition in Ukraine? Something that we wanted to hear about here. On page 71, it says that internal resources are often lacking, including qualified potential. Now my question, what are the recommendations here? What do we have to do in order to improve to build the capacity of the leadership? Something is wrong with my mic, so I would like to say thank you to the head of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. So we'd like to have a copy of their report in order to establish for ourselves that it provides some vision of the further development of competitive policy in this country. By the way, I have a proposal. There's something which is called research report. But in this case, that report should be prepared by experts, by representatives of the business associations, including representatives of some other ministries. We would love to see much better coordination between promoting competition, not just punishing those who act against it. So when do we start promoting competition, protecting our businesses? Too often those businesses are treated as the object of the discussion rather than the subject of the discussion. Well, now there seems to exist only one public authority that is directly tasked with promoting competition in the country. I'm not a panelist in the discussion, but I'll try to deal with your question. During the first panel of today, attended by Mr. Kakaya, Lucy, Virginie, we discussed exactly what you have been now talking about. We mentioned that this book is not about the Anti-Monopoly Committee. This is a book about Ukraine. It tries to measure the maturity of the nation in terms of its competitive policy and protection of competition. This report also points to the AMCU's response to various violations and irregularities. By the way, in the very beginning of the review, it is mentioned that there is a need to fill this gap, this lacuna by coordinated effort of the MCU, Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. We had Mr. Nefedov talking, representative of the World Bank, Maria, and all of them mentioned that we are now working jointly on the national program of competition promotion and protection, something in order to contribute constructively to further development of competition. So this review does not substitute for the annual report of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. The annual report of the Anti-Monopoly Committee is something we produce annually. We have already decided to change the format, and you're gonna see it in its new form 2 weeks from now. In November last year, we held what I would call an constituent meeting, having invited representatives of the universities that have competition law and competition promotion policy to attend. There were about 100 attendees. Mr. Lutzi was there, a representative of the Federal Trade Commission. We told them what we had been working on at that time, and it was also proposed to set up an expert council, an expert group to be able to maintain an ongoing dialogue with our academia and research community, and also to involve them in the development of our regulatory framework and specifying the priorities of the competition development policy. The work is going on, and I hope that we will soon be able to come up with some. Otherwise, I would like to, acknowledge that only pursuit of the offenders won't give a boost to competition. That's probably the last question. It's not a question, it's a comment, if I may. And the comment of mine is as follows. Right now, when we're here, the nation's budget for the next year has started to be drafted sometime in May. It'll have some initial shape ready to be considered by the Ministry of Finance and other authorities. So let me grab this opportunity and to say that the situation with regard to the staffing of the AMCU correlates well with the present rate of compensations available to the personnel of the of course, the decision is made elsewhere, but I have a proposal to make. If you look at the salaries, the Ministry of Finance compares the salaries of the so-called chief specialist. Now, look at the salary paid to the chief specialist of MCU and other. You'll be shocked. After all, this is an agency that investigates sectors of economy. It investigates into competition restrictive steps taken by sometimes officials as high as ministries. Mr. Nefedov, I understand that it's difficult to lobby for the MCU's interest at the Ministry of Finance. So why don't you, Mr. Nefedov, and your superior, immediate superior, the ministry, set up a special group that would lobby for an acceptable mechanism to fund the AMCU on a transparent basis. Some people may be not very happy, at least general public, with our proposal, so I have a proposal to make. Mrs. Zheny and Lutsev produced a very good document. We discussed it briefly, and inter alia it points to the need to improve the financing of the entire MCU. So jointly with Mr. Sivkash, Mr. Kakaya will probably endorse this proposal. Why don't we, us, OECD, World Bank set up a work group to identify solutions of how to improve the finances of the AMCU, including probably some grant funds, at least for the time being. Then Mr. Terentiev will get a real tool to support functionality of his committee. Investigations, especially into cartels that have to be broken. Latvian, Austrian experience could come in very handy. So I do have a specific proposal. OECD, World Bank, Competition Development Foundation could indeed create a work group to develop specific proposals to the government, and you, Mr. Nefedov, could act as the ambassador, as the messenger. Thank you. Thank you very much, and with this I invite everyone to go